She had sworn never to save another life again, until a drowning Mustang stared into her soul and made her choose between fear and redemption. The words rang true for Riley Morgan, whether she wanted them or not. The Sierra Nevada foothills had become her prison and her sanctuary, a place where the world could forget her and she could pretend the world didn't exist. But that morning, as thunder rumbled low and distant, Riley's exile began to crack at the edges. Rain had hammered the mountains for a week, turning the dirt roads into ribbons of mud and the small creeks into churning brown rivers. Riley stood at the kitchen window, mug of coffee cooling between her palms, her eyes fixed on the storm-swollen world outside. Even now, she wore her old ER trauma uniform. Blue scrubs faded from too many wash cycles, a medical symbol tattoo peeking from her wrist, as though daring her to remember who she used to be. Her little cabin was cluttered with growing herbs, jars of home remedies, and books stacked everywhere. But nothing could fill the silence left by her brother. Some nights Riley wandered the halls, letting her brother's old playlist loop through the speaker, the low croon of folk singers mingling with the steady beat of rain against the windows. She'd pace the rooms, sipping cold coffee, remembering a time before every rescue felt like a threat instead of a calling. What happened to make her give up saving lives? It was always the same question, the same memory. The river rescue gone wrong, her little brother's trusting eyes, the wild swirl of water, her own hands clutching desperately at him as he slipped away. She had led the mission. She had lost him. The guilt lived in her bones, refusing to be washed away no matter how many storms swept the hills. That morning, something was different. Riley felt it in her skin, a prickle of anticipation that she hadn't felt in years. She tried to brush it off, blaming the restless weather, but it refused to let go. When her phone buzzed with a weather alert, she ignored it. She couldn't ignore the gnawing in her gut. Before noon, she decided to check the old canyon road. The official story was that she wanted to make sure her garden plot by the trail wasn't underwater. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't stand another minute inside, alone with her ghosts. She pulled on a rain jacket, tugged her hair into a rough ponytail, and grabbed the battered truck keys. The drive was slow, the wipers barely keeping up with the sheets of rain. Along the way, Riley caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, lines etched at the corners, a face haunted by more than sleepless nights. She was only 36, but she felt ancient. She turned onto the canyon road, gravel spitting under her tires. The world here felt wild, half forgotten. Trees bowed low with rain, streams flooding the banks, rocks glistening with moss. For a moment, Riley let herself breathe. Out here, the weight on her chest seemed lighter, the air cleaner. But as she rounded a bend near the old bridge, a sound sliced through the rain, a faint, eerie whinny, rising and falling with the wind. Riley froze, heart stuttering. It couldn't be. There weren't supposed to be horses this far up the canyon, not after the wild herds had been driven out by the last round of forest fires. She shook her head, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination, a memory playing tricks in the storm. But her instincts, honed from years of listening to the edge between life and death, refused to quiet. You're not hallucinating. You're sensing something. The voice inside her wasn't gentle. It was the same voice that had told her to run toward the screams instead of away. The voice that used to save people. Riley slowed the truck, squinting through the rain. The road curved sharply, and the old river, usually a trickle, now roared beneath, swollen nearly to the banks. That's when she saw it. A flash of chestnut against the river's fury. Massive, elegant, and utterly out of place. The Mustang was caught in the raging current, tossed violently by the water, hooves scraping for purchase on a half-submerged rock. Its coat shone even through the mud, deep reddish-brown with a shock of silver mane plastered against its neck. Its eyes were wide, rolling with panic and pain. Nostrils flared as it fought to stay above the water. Riley's breath caught. Her hands tightened on the wheel so hard her knuckles went white. For a split second, she was no longer in her truck. She was 16 again, standing on the riverbank, her brother slipping from her grip, the world dissolving into chaos. The sound of rushing water filled her ears, drowning out everything else. "Walk away," her whole body screamed. "Just turn around, drive home, and forget you ever saw it. You don't save lives anymore. You can't even save yourself." But then the horse looked at her, truly looked at her. Its eyes, wild and desperate, locked with hers, as if begging her for something she didn't know she still had left to give. "Don't do this to me," Riley whispered, voice shaking. She felt tears pricking at her eyes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Not again. But she was already throwing the truck into park, grabbing the old rope she kept behind the seat, slamming the door against the rain. Her boots sank into the mud as she stumbled down the bank, the cold water licking at her shins. The current was faster than she'd expected, the river swollen with rage. She paused, the rope clenched in her trembling fist. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the Mustang's terror and her own. For a second, Riley stepped forward. Then she stopped, heart pounding, the storm howling around her. She took one step back, fighting with herself, the rope dangling at her side. Everything inside her screamed to run, to let the river take what it would. She stood in the rain, fists clenched, trembling. And then something broke. She screamed at the sky, her voice raw with anger and grief, rain mixing with tears. "You die if I walk away. And maybe I die too." The words were barely a whisper, but they gave her the answer she needed. Without another thought, Riley charged into the flood. The river didn't welcome Riley. It seized her, dragging her almost off her feet the moment she plunged into the current. The rain lashed her face, half blinding her, and her boots slipped on rocks slick with moss and mud. She gripped the frayed rope in both hands, forcing herself to focus on the Mustang ahead, its chestnut body battered by the water, white mane streaming like a flag of surrender. Riley's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to let the river take the horse and her guilt with it. But something ancient and stubborn inside her, something she thought the years had burned away, drove her forward. The cold was shocking. It bit through her jeans, numbed her calves and thighs. The river was deeper than it looked, swirling with debris, broken branches, cans, a wild tangle of roots. Each step was a gamble. Her feet found purchase, then slipped, then found again. She kept her eyes on the horse, forcing her mind away from the memory of her brother's small, cold hand slipping from hers. The Mustang, enormous and beautiful, even in terror, thrashed against the current. Its hooves struck at the rocks, at the water, sometimes at nothing. Its eyes rolled wildly. Riley could see the lead rope around its neck, caught on a branch, but tangled and useless, a thin lifeline turning into a noose. She edged closer, using a fallen tree root for balance. The river surged, nearly sweeping her off her feet. The branch slashed across her shin, leaving a burning trail of pain. She sucked in a breath, tasting fear and adrenaline, fighting to stay upright. "Easy, boy. Easy now," she called, her voice trembling, nearly lost to the storm. She reached out the rope, willing her hands to be steady. The horse lashed out with its hind leg, kicked the water, kicked the air. One hoof clipped Riley's ribs, knocking the breath out of her. She doubled over, gasping, but refused to let go. Her mind flashed back, her brother's hand slipping, his face vanishing beneath the water, her own scream torn from her throat. Not again. Not this time. She slid the rope around the Mustang's neck, working fast as her fingers shook. Not barbed wire, thank God. Just an old lid, rough but strong. She talked to him, a steady stream of words that barely made sense even to her. "You're okay. I'm right here. I got you." The horse tossed its head, spraying her with water, but didn't try to bite. Riley braced herself, both hands gripping the rope, feet dug into the riverbank. The Mustang was heavy, soaked, exhausted, but not broken. "Come on, Storm," she cried, giving him the name as if it could root him to the world, to hope, to survival. "Don't you quit now. Don't you dare." A massive log crashed down the river, missing them by inches. It slammed into the far bank, shattering in a spray of bark and foam. Riley flinched, but forced herself to keep pulling, inch by inch, both of them fighting for breath, for life. The horse surged, a final burst of strength. Riley used the tree root as leverage, hauling with every ounce of muscle she had left. The river tried to tear them apart, but she refused to let go. Storm's hooves finally found the sandbank, just above the raging floodline. He stumbled, almost falling, but Riley threw her arms around his thick neck, using her own body to steady him. The two of them collapsed together, soaked, shaking, barely able to move. The rain still came down, but the worst of the storm was passing, a soft glow rising in the east, dawn creeping into the world again. Riley pressed her forehead against the horse's neck, her breath ragged, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't sure if she was crying from pain, relief, or the tidal wave of emotion that threatened to sweep her away. Storm didn't bolt. He stood, chest heaving, sides slick with sweat and rain. He nudged her, gently with his muzzle, warm and insistent, as if to say, "I'm still here. You're still here." For a moment, there was nothing but the two of them and the sound of the river fading behind them. She murmured, barely above a whisper, "Storm. That's what I'll call you, because you're not just in the river. You're in me." The words surprised her, but they felt true. Storm was a force, not just of nature, but of everything Riley had tried to bury. Her fear, her guilt, her stubborn hope. They lay there, time suspended. Riley felt her body shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only exhaustion. She let her eyes close for a second, just long enough to feel Storm's breath on her face. The rhythm of life. Steady, unbroken, a reminder that even the worst currents eventually pass. But the danger wasn't over. She knew Storm was in shock, his legs trembling, cuts oozing blood beneath his thick coat. If she didn't move him soon, he could go down again, right into the icy water. Gritting her teeth, Riley pushed herself up. "Come on, boy. We have to get you out of here." Her jacket was soaked, useless. She stripped it off and draped it over Storm's neck, trying to give him some warmth, some shelter. With every step she coaxed him, talking quietly, stroking his mane. He responded, his ears flicking, eyes following her. Step by step, muddy and slow, they made their way up the bank, out of the river's grip. Riley stumbled twice, catching herself on Storm's neck, refusing to let the pain or fear win. As the rain eased, a shaft of golden light broke through the clouds, illuminating Storm's mane. It shone like a silver crown, radiant and wild. Riley felt a strange surge of hope, small but fierce. "If you can stand up, I can too," she whispered, voice hoarse. She wasn't sure who she was talking to anymore, herself, the horse, or her brother's memory. By the time they reached her truck, both were limping, exhausted, but upright. She opened the back gate, coaxed Storm inside, and collapsed beside him, her head on his shoulder, both of them shaking, both of them alive. As she drove slowly home, rain tapping a softer rhythm on the roof, Riley glanced at Storm in the rearview mirror. He watched her, unblinking, trusting her with everything he had left. And for the first time in years, Riley felt something crack open inside her. Not pain, not guilt, but the possibility of healing. The storm had nearly taken them both, but together they had chosen to fight. They drove into the dawn, battered but unbroken, leaving the river behind. The cabin was barely awake when Riley pulled up, the first gold of sunrise filtering through pine branches still dripping with rain. Storm's breaths fogged the window of the truck, his huge frame pressed awkwardly into the bed, eyes tracking every movement Riley made as she opened the tailgate. Her body throbbed with exhaustion, ribs aching from where his hooves had caught her, knees scraped raw from river stones. But none of it mattered now. They'd made it home. Somehow, against the river and the night and her own haunted heart, they'd made it home. Riley braced herself against the side of the truck, catching her breath as she surveyed the little barn at the edge of her property. It was nothing special, just an old converted tool shed, its roof patched with sheet metal, the inside lined with fresh hay, and the remnants of her last attempt at raising chickens. But it was dry, and it was safe. She moved quickly, finding strength in the rhythm of old habits, throwing open the barn doors, tossing fresh straw over the dirt, checking for anything sharp or dangerous. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, the world washed clean and quiet, except for Storm's unsteady snorting and the distant drip of water off the eaves. Riley returned to the truck and stroked Storm's damp muzzle, murmuring, "Easy, boy. Almost done now. Just a few more steps, okay?" Storm's muscles quivered as he slid clumsily from the bed to the ground, legs stiff with cold and fatigue. Riley walked at his side, one hand gently guiding him, the other gripping his makeshift rope halter. She could feel him wavering, but he trusted her. He followed her into the barn with only a single hesitant pause, ears flicking nervously at the smell of hay and unfamiliar walls. Inside, she coaxed him into a corner near a work lamp, then quickly shut the doors against the rising wind. The silence after the storm was nearly absolute, a silence filled with promise and, for the first time in years, hope. Riley crouched beside Storm, examining him in the pale yellow glow. Blood oozed from a gash on his hind leg. Scratches marked his shoulder and ribs, and his coat was a patchwork of bruises, mud, and old scars. She could see the shivers running through him, his chest heaving with every breath. Her hands shook as she reached for her battered medical kit, the same one she hadn't touched since her brother's death. The sight of it brought a stab of memory. The way she used to lay out bandages and ointments with military precision, her brother teasing her that she was always ready for battle. Now, her hands hovered over the kit, unsure, as if the tools inside might bite. For a heartbeat, she considered calling someone else, an old colleague from the hospital, a vet from the next county over. But the idea of another person in her sanctuary, seeing the way she lived now, was unbearable. Storm needed her. No one else. She forced her hands to move. Bandages, antiseptic, a pair of scissors. Her movements were clumsy at first, but muscle memory, hard-earned from nights in the ER, slowly returned. She spoke softly to Storm, narrating her actions in the soothing voice she once used with frightened patience. "Just cleaning this up. Won't hurt much, I promise. You're safe now, big guy." Storm twitched, but didn't pull away. His eyes, intelligent, impossibly deep, followed her every move. As Riley worked, her mind drifted, the old pain ebbing and flowing like the tide. For years, she'd been running from the memory of the river, from the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't save the people she loved. Yet, here she was, hands steadying over a trembling life, refusing to walk away. When she finished tending Storm's wounds, Riley fashioned a makeshift stall with old wooden planks and the thickest bales of hay she could find. She wrapped a dry blanket around his shoulders and set up a heat lamp to chase away the chill. As she worked, she found herself humming. A tune from her brother's old playlist, the words lost but the melody clear. Exhaustion crashed over her like another wave. She slumped onto a pile of hay, back pressed against the stall wall, legs stretched out beside Storm's. She pulled her brother's journal from her jacket pocket, a battered notebook with pages smudged by rain and years of grief, and opened it to a blank page. With hands steadier than she'd expected, she began to sketch Storm, outlining his proud head, his tangled mane, the lines of strength beneath the mud. For a long time, she just sat there. The quiet, broken only by the horse's slow, even breathing. Sunlight edged across the barn floor, brightening the dust motes and warming her chilled skin. The storm had passed, at least for now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. It was a message from the hospital, automated but achingly familiar. "Riley, we could use your help in the ER. If you're ready." She stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button. She wasn't ready. She didn't think she ever would be. But for the first time in years, she wanted to say something more than just no. After a moment's hesitation, she typed, "I'm not ready to come back. But I think I'm ready to begin again." She hit send before she could change her mind, heart pounding. The message wasn't just for the hospital. It was for herself, for her brother's memory, for Storm, for anyone who ever thought they were finished and discovered, against all odds, that life had other plans. She set the phone aside and reached out to Storm, laying her hand against his neck. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes calm and certain. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she was thanking the horse, her brother's spirit, or the universe itself. "Thank you for not giving up." For a while, Riley dozed, dreams flitting between the past and the uncertain future. In one, she and her brother rode horses together under a sky as clear as glass. In another, Storm ran beside her, through fields washed clean by rain, neither of them afraid anymore. When she woke, Storm was still there, breathing softly, his wounds cleaned and bandaged, the dawn full and bright. Riley knew that the world outside would test her again, memories would surge, storms would come. But in this moment, she allowed herself to hope. Redemption, she thought, wasn't a single act or a sudden miracle. It was 1,000 small choices. The choice to try, even when it hurt. The choice to reach out, even when you wanted to hide. The choice to begin again, one breath at a time. And so, as the morning light spilled over the barn, Riley Morgan, broken healer, reluctant rescuer, survivor, sat with Storm and let the new day wash over them both, ready for whatever came next. Sunlight crept slowly across the barn floor, dappling Storm's chestnut coat with honey gold light. Riley sat slumped against the rough boards, legs sprawled, her brother's old journal still open in her lap. The pencil sketch she'd started of Storm was surprisingly gentle. The line of his jaw, the way his mane swept over his neck, the haunted resilience in his eyes. It was the first time in years she'd tried to capture life on a blank page instead of fighting to hold on to it in her hands. A quiet, restless energy stirred inside her. She'd barely slept, jolting awake every hour at the smallest sound, a distant owl, the wind rattling the barn door, Storm shifting restlessly on his makeshift bed. Each time, her mind circled old fears. Would the horse make it through the day? Would he spook and hurt himself? Would the world come crashing in if she dared let her guard down? Outside, the storm had passed, but the ground was still soaked, mud clinging to boots and the air smelling of wet pine and earth. Riley stood and stretched, feeling every bruise, every cut, the ache in her ribs from Storm's wild kick. She glanced over at him. He was awake, one ear cocked toward her, the other flicking at a fly. He looked less like a wild thing on the edge of panic now, more like an exhausted soldier home from battle. "Morning, Storm," she said softly. She moved with slow, measured steps, so as not to startle him. He watched her, wary but trusting, as she refilled the battered water bucket and spread fresh hay in the corner. Riley's movements were a strange dance, half habit, half improvisation. She'd never cared for a horse before, at least not like this, but old nursing instincts surfaced. Check for infection, monitor breathing, watch for signs of shock. She approached Storm's side and gently examined the wound on his hind leg. The bleeding had stopped, but the cut was deep, edged with raw flesh. She cleaned it again, with saline, wincing as Storm flinched, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he pressed his head lightly against her shoulder, a small act of trust that made Riley's throat tighten. "You're a tough one," she murmured, smoothing his mane. "Stubborn, too. Guess we have that in common." For a moment her voice threatened to break, but she swallowed the ache and focused on the present. After tending to Storm, Riley slipped outside, the chilly morning air biting her cheeks. She squinted up at the sky, bright and cloudless, the world washed clean after the storm. She trudged to the house and made herself a mug of coffee, black, strong, no cream. She stood by the kitchen window, watching the barn, mug cradled in her hands, remembering her brother's laughter and the way he used to tease her about her addiction to burnt bean water. The silence was comfortable, not oppressive. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to fill it with music or movement. She let herself breathe, in and out, steady as the horse in her barn. But as she sipped her coffee, her phone vibrated on the countertop. She eyed it warily. A message from a former colleague. Not the hospital this time, but someone from the rescue team she'd once called family. Heard you had a rough night up in the canyon. Everything okay? News traveled fast in the foothills, Riley thought, especially when it came to wild horses and the people who tried to save them. She hesitated before replying, then typed, "Found a Mustang in the river. He's with me. We're both a little worse for wear, but we made it out." The reply was almost instant. "You need anything, just say the word, or if you need company. I'll swing by with coffee." Riley looked toward the barn, imagining her friend sitting at her table, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Thanks, but I'm good for now. Just need some quiet." She hit send, then set the phone down and stepped outside again. The sun was higher now, dew steaming off the grass. Riley walked back to the barn, boots squelching in the mud, a strange calm growing inside her with each step. She realized she wasn't just tending to Storm. She was, in small ways, tending to herself. She felt alive, her senses sharp and clear, the constant ache of grief shifting slightly. Not gone, but lighter. In the barn, Storm greeted her with a low nicker. She grinned, surprised at how quickly she'd learned to read his moods, the way his ears pricked forward when she approached, the twitch of his skin when he was nervous, the heavy sigh that meant he was beginning to trust her. She sat beside him, journal in hand, sketching the angle of his head, the slant of his shoulder. Storm watched her with wide, liquid eyes, as if he could sense her unraveling, knot by knot. Around noon, Riley fetched a small radio from the house and set it on a crate beside the stall. She turned it low, letting the soft hum of music drift through the barn, a mix of old folk songs and gentle guitar. Storm flicked his ears, then settled his chin on his folded legs, eyes half closed in the sunlight. Riley leaned back against the stall and let her mind wander. She remembered a day, long ago, her brother's birthday, a backyard barbecue, music playing as they danced barefoot in the grass. The memory was sharp and sweet, not as painful as it once had been. Maybe, she thought, healing was less about forgetting and more about letting yourself feel, letting the memories in, even if they hurt. She spent the afternoon moving between the barn and the garden, checking on her herbs and gathering a handful of mint and lavender. She made a poultice for Storm's wounds, crushing the leaves between her palms until the scent filled the barn. As she applied the mixture, Storm's ears flicked, but he stayed still, trusting her hands and her voice. "You know," she said softly, "I used to believe second chances were a fairy tale. That once you broke, you stayed broken, but maybe that's not true. Maybe we're all just waiting for the right storm to wash us clean." Storm huffed, a warm cloud of breath fogging the cool air. Riley laughed, a short, surprised sound. She hadn't laughed in so long it felt like discovering a new muscle. As dusk approached, Riley made a bed of straw for herself beside Storm. She didn't want to leave him alone through the night, not after everything they'd survived together. She wrapped herself in an old quilt, the faded blue squares stitched by her grandmother, and listened to the horse's steady breathing. She felt the weight of the world pressing down, but also something new, a fragile hope born of shared struggle and quiet companionship. Before drifting off, she scribbled a few lines in her brother's journal. "He didn't save me. We saved each other." Maybe that's what healing is, finding someone as lost as you are and walking each other home, step by muddy step. The barn was silent except for Storm's slow breaths and the soft shuffle of straw. Outside, the world turned quietly beneath the stars, and Riley Morgan let herself sleep, a little less afraid of tomorrow than she'd been the day before. Riley woke to the sound of Storm's steady breathing and the faint streaks of dawn slipping through cracks in the barn roof. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The earthy scent of hay, the warmth of the horse beside her, the ache in her body, all of it grounded her in a new reality. She'd survived the storm, and somehow she'd brought a stranger through it, too. She rolled over, careful not to startle Storm, and stretched out the kinks in her back. The barn was still and peaceful, a far cry from the chaos of the ER or the wild rush of the river. For the first time in a long while, Riley felt herself breathe deeply, her mind blessedly clear. Storm stirred, lifting his head. He blinked at her, his silver mane catching the new sunlight, giving him an almost mythical look. Riley grinned, reaching out to gently stroke his neck. "Morning, hero. Looks like we're both still here." She checked his bandages, relieved to find the bleeding had stopped. The wound was ugly, but clean, a good sign. She swapped out the dressing, talking to him in a soft voice, not to fill the silence, but because she needed to believe he understood. "We'll get you better, Storm. Promise." After refilling his water and laying out fresh hay, Riley slipped back into the house. The kitchen looked the same as ever. Half-washed dishes, coffee grounds scattered across the counter, the small window framing a view of the misty hillside. She brewed herself coffee, the smell rich and comforting, and leaned against the sink, staring out at the morning. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A quick glance showed a string of unread messages. The hospital again, her former team, even her mother. For a moment, Riley considered ignoring them all, but something inside her was shifting, subtle but insistent. She tapped out quick replies, assurances that she was fine, that she was taking some time for herself. When her mother's message popped up, "Riley, sweetheart, you don't have to do this alone. Come home." She paused, thumbs hovering. Home. The word ached in her chest. She glanced back at the barn, then typed, "I'm okay, Mom. Really, I have company now. I'll call you soon." Outside, the world was waking up. Birds singing, dew sparkling on the grass, the air sharp with pine and the after-scent of rain. Riley finished her coffee, grabbed her brother's old flannel shirt for warmth, and headed back out to Storm. She found him standing, a little steadier than the night before, nuzzling at the remains of the hay. "Ready for some fresh air?" she asked. She led him into the yard, moving slowly so he wouldn't strain his injured leg. The ground was still soft and muddy, but the sun was climbing, promising a better day. They spent the morning in the yard, Riley tending her herb garden, while Storm grazed nearby, ears flicking at the sound of her voice as she told him stories. About her brother, about the city, about the things she missed and the things she hoped for. At first, her words came haltingly, a confession to the cool air and the wild animal who had, by accident or fate, become her charge. It was during one of these rambling stories, as Riley pulled weeds from between rows of mint, that the memories came rushing back, unbidden and sharp. She remembered the last time she'd tried to save someone, her brother's trusting eyes, the panic as the river swept him away, her own voice breaking as she screamed his name. The guilt returned, heavy as ever, but something was different now. The presence of Storm, his calm acceptance, the simple routine of care, they anchored her. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow, and watched Storm chew contentedly. "Do you know," she said quietly, "that I thought I'd never help anyone again? Not after what happened, not after losing him." Her words hung in the morning air, honest and raw. "But you didn't let me turn away, did you?" Storm lifted his head, nostrils flaring, as if he understood the question. Later that day, Riley gathered her courage and called her mother. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, worried voice answered. "Riley?" "Hey, Mom," Riley replied, her voice trembling only a little. "Just wanted you to know I'm okay. I took in a Mustang. Found him during the flood. He's hurt, but he's tough." Her mother was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "That sounds like you, honey. Still saving things, even if you think you're broken." Riley swallowed, the words sticking in her throat. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." They talked for a while, mostly small things, memories of Riley's brother, stories from her childhood, laughter mingled with tears. When she hung up, Riley felt lighter, as if by sharing her burden, she'd taken a step toward healing. The next few days fell into a gentle routine. Riley woke with the sun, checked Storm's wounds, fed and watered him, then worked in her garden or repaired the fences damaged by the storm. Storm gained strength day by day, his limp slowly improving, his eyes brightening as he grew more comfortable with his new home. Every night, Riley slept in the barn, not out of necessity, but by choice. The silence was different there, peaceful, not lonely. Storm would sometimes nudge her as she drifted off, his breath warm on her cheek, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. But with each passing day, Riley felt the weight of her old life pressing in at the edges. She caught herself staring at the hospital text longer, thinking about what it might mean to return. Not as the broken woman who'd run away, but as someone changed. Someone capable of facing the world again. The thought frightened her. Could she ever walk those halls without seeing her brother's ghost? Could she trust herself to save lives again, knowing how easily they could be lost? On the fourth night, a storm rolled in, not as violent as the one before, but enough to rattle the barn roof and remind Riley how quickly things could change. She woke in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sweat slick on her skin. For a moment, she was back at the river, the memory so vivid she could smell the cold water and hear her brother's laughter swallowed by the current. But then Storm's muzzle pressed gently against her shoulder, grounding her. She buried her face in his mane, breathing in the scent of horse and hay and rain, letting the fear pass through her. When the storm moved on, taking the worst of her nightmares with it, she sat up and stroked Storm's neck, whispering, "We're okay. We're still here." By dawn, the sky was clear and the world felt new again. Riley opened the barn doors and let the sunlight flood in. She knew the shadows would return, old habits, old fears, but for now, she chose to move forward, step by step. Storm watched her as she crossed the yard, his gaze steady, unafraid. Together, they began again, two survivors stitched together by fate and forgiveness, building a life from the remnants of the storm. The days settled into a new kind of rhythm for Riley and Storm. It was a life stripped down to essentials: feed the horse, tend the wounds, mend the fence, plant the garden, repeat. But beneath the simple routines, something fundamental was shifting, like the deep roots of a tree quietly finding new water after a long drought. Riley had never considered herself a person who needed company. Since the accident, she'd gone out of her way to avoid it, retreating to her mountainside, letting her phone collect dust and letting friendships fade into distant memory. But Storm's presence was different. He asked nothing of her except patience, care, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Still, the world beyond the cabin and barn did not forget her. News of the river rescue had traveled, as news always did in the foothills, passed from neighbor to neighbor, changed in each retelling. Riley had barely responded to her mother's texts and hospital messages before the first visitor arrived. It happened one soft afternoon when sunlight dappled through the tall pines and Storm dozed in the barn, breathing deep and steady. Riley was in the garden, knees deep in dirt, when the crunch of tires on gravel made her freeze. For a moment, panic surged, an old habit. She wiped her hands on her jeans and forced herself to walk to the driveway. A red pickup idled by the fence. Out climbed Cass Harper, an old friend from the ER days, back before everything unraveled. Cass was tall and wiry, her hair pulled into a messy bun, scrubs swapped for hiking boots and a battered flannel shirt. "Thought I might find you here?" Cass called out, her voice easy and familiar. She held out a tray of pastries and a thermos. "Bribery." "Don't tell me it won't work." Riley tried to hide her smile, but it came anyway. Small, awkward, but real. "You're lucky I missed breakfast." They settled at the rickety picnic table beside the house, the mountains rising blue and distant behind them. For a while, they ate in silence, the quiet companionable. Cass poured coffee and studied Riley with kind, steady eyes. "Word is, you dragged a Mustang out of the river," Cass said after a bit. "That true?" Riley shrugged, running her thumb along a crack in the tabletop. "More like he dragged me. I just couldn't walk away." Cass grinned. "That's the Riley I remember. Impossible to leave well enough alone." They talked, at first about small things, the stubborn rooster from Cass's farm, the latest ER gossip, the state of the world. Riley found herself relaxing, letting her guard down, laughter slipping out easier than she expected. But inevitably, the conversation turned toward deeper waters. Cass's voice softened. "How are you? Really?" The question hung in the air. Riley considered dodging it, but something in Cass's gaze wouldn't let her. She looked down at her hands, then out at the barn. "Some days are better than others," Riley admitted. "I keep thinking about that night, the river, my brother. There are moments when it's all I can see. But with Storm, it's like caring for him gives me permission to care about other things again. It's terrifying." Cass nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You don't have to do it alone, you know? Grief's a heavy load. Sometimes it takes more than one set of hands." Riley let the words in, felt the sting of truth and comfort in them. "I know. I needed to prove to myself I could still save something, even if it was just a horse." A silence, gentle and unhurried, stretched between them. Cass reached out, squeezing Riley's hand. "He's lucky to have you. And you're lucky to have him. Don't close the door on people who care, okay?" Riley nodded, her throat thick. "Okay." Cass glanced at her watch, standing up. "I should get going. Leave you to your miracle horse. But I'm coming back next week. With real coffee, not this hospital swill." Riley laughed, walking her friend to the truck. "You're on." When Cass drove away, Riley stood by the fence for a while, feeling the sun on her face and the ache in her chest loosen just a little. She realized she hadn't felt this kind of warmth, not just from the sun, but from human kindness, in a long, long time. She wandered back to the barn, where Storm stood, watching her with those liquid brown eyes. She ran her fingers through his mane, feeling the pulse of life beneath his skin. "Company's not so bad, huh?" she murmured, and Storm pressed his nose into her shoulder in agreement. But healing was never a straight line. That night, as dusk pooled like indigo ink at the edges of the trees, Riley found herself fighting old shadows. She stood on her porch, staring into the growing dark, memories crashing against her mind in relentless waves. Her brother's laughter, his last words, the cold, hungry river. She wondered if Storm felt it too, the burden of survival, the ache of things lost and never found. Back in the barn, she lay on her side beside Storm, the night filled with crickets and the creak of the barn settling in the wind. She pressed her cheek to Storm's neck, drawing comfort from his steady warmth. "I don't know if I can ever go back," she whispered into the darkness. "But I think I want to try." The days that followed were marked by small victories and setbacks. Storm's wound healed slowly, the limp fading until he could walk the yard with only a hint of stiffness. Riley found herself leaving the house more, taking longer walks in the woods, sitting by the river, sketching the changing light in her brother's journal. Her phone buzzed less, but when it did, she answered more often. Cass sent messages, sometimes jokes, sometimes just a single line. "You're doing good. Keep going." Her mother called every few days, sharing memories and worries, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. And always there was Storm, a constant steady presence, a living reminder that broken things could mend if only you let them. One golden morning, as Riley and Storm walked by the river, she let herself imagine what it might feel like to try again, to return to the world, to face the things she'd run from. The thought scared her, but also filled her with an unfamiliar hope. Storm nudged her gently, as if sensing her thoughts, and Riley laughed, the sound ringing out clear and bright over the water. Maybe healing wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about remembering and choosing to keep going anyway. That night, she wrote in her brother's journal, "Some days I wake up and the grief is gone. Some days it's everywhere. But I'm still here. Storm is still here. We're learning to live with both." And as the stars spun silently over the Sierra Nevada foothills, Riley Morgan closed her eyes beside the Mustang who'd saved her as much as she'd saved him, daring at last to dream of a future that might hold more than pain. Riley woke to the gentle sounds of a world slowly returning to itself. The chirping of birds, the soft nicker of Storm waiting patiently in his stall, the wind moving through the pines. She lay still for a while on the straw, letting the morning seep in, grounding herself in the ordinary magic of waking up without dread as her first companion. Even the pain in her ribs and the dull ache in her back felt manageable. Reminders of survival, not defeat. After a simple breakfast, she fetched her brother's old blue blanket and draped it over Storm's back, laughing as he shook his head and tried to nibble at the corner. "You're lucky you're handsome," she teased, running her hand down his nose, "or I'd never put up with you." That day, Riley felt braver. The sun was shining, Storm's limp was barely noticeable, and he followed her with more eagerness, nudging at her pockets for treats, tossing his mane in the breeze. She decided to walk him a little farther from the barn than usual, to see if he could manage the soft rise of the meadow behind her house. They set out, step by careful step, Storm's weight leaning into the halter at first, but confidence blooming with every yard. Riley spoke softly, encouraging him, pointing out birds in the trees and the distant snow still lingering on the higher peaks. She let herself remember other walks from another life, her brother beside her, running ahead, fearless and wild. The pain was still there, but less sharp, less able to cut her down where she stood. They reached the crest of the meadow, wildflowers blooming in explosions of yellow and violet, the air sweet and new. Storm pawed at the earth, ears pricked, tail flicking as he tested his boundaries. Riley let him move a little further, trusting him, and herself, a bit more with every minute. It was there, in that brief moment of peace, that the past threatened to reclaim her. A sudden movement in the woods, a branch snapping, a flash of movement, sent Storm spinning around, nearly knocking Riley off her feet. Her heart leapt into her throat, her hands tightening on the lead rope. Storm's eyes were wide, nostrils flaring, body trembling with old panic. Riley spoke quickly, voice steady despite the fear clawing up her own chest. "Easy, boy. It's just a deer. Just a deer. You're safe, I promise." She stroked his neck, murmuring reassurances, feeling the tension ease from his body by inches. Only when Storm pressed his head into her shoulder did she let out the breath she'd been holding, her own hands shaking. It took several minutes for both of them to settle. Riley knelt in the grass, letting Storm graze beside her, forcing herself to breathe. "We're both a work in progress, huh?" she whispered, voice wobbly but real. "One step at a time?" The rest of the walk was quieter, both woman and horse a little more cautious, a little more attuned to every sound and shadow, but they made it back to the barn without further incident. Riley tended Storm's leg, grateful the wound hadn't reopened, and then sat in the sunlight, back against the barn wall, letting herself feel proud. It was only that evening, as dusk settled soft and golden over the foothills, that the setback came. Riley noticed Storm shifting his weight more than usual, favoring his injured leg. His appetite seemed dulled, and he swished his tail in irritation, stamping once at the ground. Worry gnawed at Riley as she checked his leg. The wound looked clean, but the swelling had returned, red and hot beneath her fingers. She cursed herself for pushing him too hard, for believing that just because she wanted them both to be better, the process could be rushed. Panic threatened to unspool her hard-won calm. She scrambled to her medical kit, pulling out supplies, checking his temperature, recalling every bit of training from her nursing days. It felt different working on a horse, bigger, stronger, yet so vulnerable. Her phone buzzed. It was Cass, checking in, as promised. "How's the miracle Mustang?" the text read. Riley's hands shook as she typed back. "Swelling's worse. He's off his feed. I think I pushed him too far," Cass replied instantly. "Could be an infection. You have any penicillin left in your kit? Want me to call Tom, the vet from Groveland?" Riley hesitated. Her pride, that old familiar shadow, told her to keep trying on her own. But Storm whinnied softly, his big body tense with discomfort, and Riley remembered Cass's words. "You don't have to do this alone. Call him, please." Within an hour, headlights crept up Riley's drive. Tom, a kindly vet in his 50s with a rolling gait and patient smile, arrived with a bag of supplies and a steady hand. Riley watched, anxiety warring with relief, as Tom examined Storm, muttering soothing nonsense to the horse all the while. "Infection setting in, but you caught it early," Tom said, cleaning and medicating the wound with practiced care. "He's tough, this one. Most Mustangs are. But even the wildest need help sometimes." Riley nodded, blinking back tears. I thought if I was careful enough, if I tried hard enough, it would be enough." Tom glanced at her, kind but direct. "You're doing everything right. Healing's not a straight line. Never is. You just have to keep showing up and let people in when you need to." He left her with instructions: antibiotics, gentle exercise, rest, and the promise to check in again soon. As his truck rumbled away, Riley leaned against the barn door, staring up at the vast night sky. Storm lay quietly on his side, exhausted, breathing deep and slow. Riley knelt beside him, running her hands along his mane, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. The fear was still there, sharp and insistent, but so was a new kind of determination. "I'm not giving up on you," she whispered fiercely. "Not tonight. Not ever." She spent the night in the barn, waking every hour to check Storm's breathing, whispering old stories and singing half-remembered songs to ease both his fear and hers. The darkness pressed close around them, but it was softer now. Not empty, not cruel, just another part of the world, waiting for the morning. When dawn finally broke, Storm nickered weakly, but his eyes were clearer, his breathing easier. Riley let herself cry then, silent tears of relief and gratitude and hope. There would be more setbacks, she knew, more nights spent fighting shadows, more days of doubt. But there would also be sunlight, laughter, and the unbreakable bond between a broken woman and the Mustang who had chosen her as much as she'd chosen him. For the first time in a long time, Riley believed that was enough. Dawn arrived slowly, cautious and soft, brushing pale gold across the foothills. Riley had dozed through the night in snatches, curled up against the rough warmth of Storm's side. Her bones ached and her eyes were gritty, but the familiar gnawing anxiety was lighter now. Less like a threat, more like a gentle warning. Pay attention, stay present, keep hope alive. As the world outside the barn awoke, Riley lifted her head from the straw, brushing hay from her cheek and blinking sleep from her eyes. Storm was lying beside her, breathing steadily, his coat flecked with sunlight. She ran a hand down his mane, feeling a surge of gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. "Morning, boy," she whispered. "You made it." Storm's ear twitched at her voice, and he let out a slow sigh. The fever was gone. The swelling in his leg had receded. For a while, Riley just sat there, her hand resting on his warm flank, letting the enormity of the relief fill her chest. Outside, the sun was climbing higher. The rain had washed the air clean, leaving the world smelling of pine needles and wet earth. A few birds hopped across the barnyard, chattering in the crisp morning. Everything felt fresh, reborn. Riley stood and stretched, every muscle sore but alive. She stepped out of the barn, drawing in deep, cold breaths, and lifted her face to the sky. The light was dazzling, filling the world with hope she'd almost forgotten she could feel. Inside, Storm made a soft noise, and Riley hurried back to him. He shifted, rolling onto his chest, and then, slowly, gathering his legs beneath him. Riley's heart raced as she watched, first fear, then awe, as Storm lifted himself, wobbly but determined, rising to stand in the streaming light that poured through the barn door. The sunlight struck his mane, turning the silver strands radiant, almost haloed. For a moment, Storm looked less like a battered survivor and more like something mythic, proud, untamed, undefeated. "You look like a king," Riley said softly, blinking back tears. She shrugged off her rain jacket and gently draped it over his shoulders, giving him a little more warmth. She pressed her forehead to his, closing her eyes, letting herself remember all the times she'd wished for one more chance to do something right, to not let go. If you can stand up, she whispered, I can too. They stood like that for a while, just breathing, just existing, until Riley felt her own strength return. She opened the barn doors wide, letting sunlight spill over the threshold, warming the earth and straw. Storm blinked in the light, his ears flicking with cautious excitement. Let's see what the world looks like today, Riley said. She coaxed Storm outside, step by muddy step, both of them slow but steady. The remnants of last night's fear trailing behind them like shadows dissolving in the dawn. The grass was wet, sparkling with dew. Storm lifted his head, nostrils flaring, catching the scent of the new day. Riley led him around the yard, her hand gentle on his rope, her heart swelling with every step he took without faltering. They paused by the old fence. Riley reached into her pocket and pulled out her brother's journal, opening to a fresh page. With Storm grazing nearby, she sketched the silhouette of his head against the rising sun, adding quick, sure lines to capture the moment. The strength in his stance, the quiet pride in his eyes, the way his mane glowed like a crown. For the first time since her brother's death, Riley felt herself not just remembering the past, but moving toward something new. She sat in the grass, journal in her lap, and let herself cry, not from pain, but from gratitude, from the impossible beauty of witnessing life fight its way back. As Storm grazed, Riley pulled out her phone and scrolled through her missed messages. This time, she didn't feel dread. She answered Cass's check-in text with a selfie. Her and Storm, both rumpled and sleepy, the barn glowing behind them. We made it through the night. He's standing. I think I am too, Cass replied, with a string of hearts and exclamation marks. I'm proud of you, Riles. Both of you. Coffee soon my treat? Riley smiled. Deal. Just let us get cleaned up first. We look like we fought the storm, and the storm lost. She sent her mother a message too, a simple line. Thank you for not giving up on me. The response came almost instantly. Never. I love you. You're stronger than you know. Later that morning, Riley found the courage to open her hospital group chat. For months, she'd left it muted, letting the world spin on without her. Now, she typed, not ready to come back yet. But I think I'm ready to begin again. Miss you all. Within minutes, messages poured in, words of encouragement, hearts, you got this, and come visit whenever you're ready. The warmth on the screen made Riley's heart ache with joy and longing, both at once. Back in the yard, Storm ambled over, bumping her with his nose. Riley laughed, brushing tears from her cheeks, and fed him a handful of apple slices. You did it, Storm. You really did. As the morning passed, Riley busied herself with small tasks, cleaning the barn, refilling water, planting seeds in the garden. Each chore felt purposeful, like a stitch mending the fabric of her world. She watched Storm moving through the sunlight, stronger now, his limp barely noticeable. Each of his victories became hers as well. By midday, Riley felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She sat on the porch, boots muddy, journal in hand, Storm grazing at the edge of the yard. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loss or regret, a future shaped by second chances, by the slow and stubborn work of healing. She wrote in her brother's journal, today he stood in the sun, silver mane shining like a promise. We are both a little less broken. Maybe this is what hope looks like. Standing up, one day at a time, letting the light in. As the sun climbed and the day warmed, Riley closed her eyes and listened to the world. She heard bird song, the wind in the pines, the steady crunch of Storm's hooves in the grass. She let herself believe, if only for a moment, that redemption wasn't a miracle, but a practice, a willingness to keep rising, to keep trying, to keep walking out into the dawn. The storm had passed. The world and the woman within it had been changed, not erased or made perfect, but made new. The days after Storm's recovery settled into a gentle golden rhythm. Sunlight poured through the barn's slats each morning, waking Riley from a sleep that was finally deep and peaceful. She no longer felt that dread-heavy weight upon her chest when she opened her eyes. Instead, there was anticipation, a spark of wonder for what the day might bring, the comforting certainty of a companion waiting for her on the other side of the barn door. Each morning, Storm stood at the gate, mane bright in the dawn, ears pricked forward as Riley approached. His wounds, once raw and angry, had healed into sturdy scars. The limp in his gait was nearly gone. Sometimes he would whinny, tossing his head, eager for a walk or a treat. Riley would always oblige. She couldn't help herself. They had saved each other in the storm, and now they saved each other each day in the quiet, steady practice of living. Riley's routine changed, little by little. She found herself lingering longer outside, mending fences, working her garden, and tending to Storm with an ease that surprised her. There was pleasure in the work, the warmth of sun on her shoulders, the smell of earth and grass, the satisfaction of caring for something that depended on her. She started opening windows she'd long kept shuttered. She let sunlight into her small kitchen and put on her brother's favorite music, letting old folk songs spill through the house. The sound, once a painful reminder, now brought a soft smile to her lips. She let herself remember, not just his loss, but his laughter, the warmth of his hugs, the times they'd raced each other through summer meadows, just like this one. One afternoon, after a long walk, Riley settled in the barn with her brother's journal. She watched Storm doze in the straw, his breath slow and deep, his muscles relaxed. She opened the journal to a new page and began to sketch. Storm's head, the slope of his neck, the gentle curve of his back. Her lines were surer now, more confident. She added details she'd only noticed through weeks of quiet observation, a splash of white on his left foreleg, the small notch in his right ear, the swirl of hair on his chest. The act of drawing became a meditation, a silent gratitude for being present, for seeing and honoring the life in front of her. She wrote beneath the sketch, "He carries his scars like medals, proof that storms can be survived. So do I." For the first time since her brother's death, Riley didn't flinch when she looked at her medical kit. She cleaned it, organized its contents, and even smiled at the old notes and doodles she and her brother had scribbled on the inside of the lid. Later that evening, she texted a photo of it to Cass. "The kit is open. I think I'm ready to use it again." Cass's reply was immediate. "We always knew you would be. So proud of you, Riles. Don't make us wait too long." That night, Riley sat beside Storm, running her fingers through his mane as she listened to the soft night sounds. The gentle hum of insects, the wind in the trees, Storm's steady breathing. The barn felt sacred, a place set apart from loss and fear. It was a space of possibility. She thought about the hospital, about the friends who had never stopped checking in, who had patiently waited for her to heal at her own pace. The prospect of returning no longer filled her with dread. She could imagine herself there, not as the haunted, broken woman who had left, but as someone who had learned to mend both others and herself. Riley pulled out her phone and opened a blank text to the ER director. Her fingers hovered above the keys, nerves fluttering in her belly. She thought of Storm, of the way he had fought through pain and terror to trust her, to take a shaky step forward each day. If he could do it, so could she. She typed, "I'm not ready to come back yet, but I think I'm ready to begin again. Thank you for waiting for me." Her thumb hesitated over send, but this time she didn't erase the words. She hit send, heart pounding. The reply was gentle and immediate. "We'll be here, Riley. Take all the time you need. The team misses you." With that, something shifted inside her, a quiet release, like a knot finally untangling. She wasn't fully healed, not yet, but she was willing to try, willing to let people in, willing to hope for more. In the following days, small changes bloomed. Riley started eating breakfast on the porch, letting the sun warm her face. She invited Cass over for coffee, and they spent a lazy morning talking and laughing, watching Storm amble through the meadow. Cass brought pastries and stories from the hospital, never pushing, just being present. For the first time, Riley didn't feel the need to hide her scars. Later, Riley began sketching the other creatures that visited the property: finches in the lilac bush, a fox darting across the field at dusk, even the pair of wild turkeys that terrorized her garden. Her journal filled up, page after page, with moments she would have missed before. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and cast long golden shadows over the land, Riley sat in the grass with Storm, her back against his warm side. She listened to the world breathing, slow, deep, alive. She thought of her brother. For so long his memory had been a source of pain, a weight she couldn't put down. Now she let herself remember the good, his laughter, his wild spirit, his endless faith in her. "I wish you could see us now," she whispered. "You'd laugh at me, living out here, taking care of a Mustang. But you'd be proud, wouldn't you?" The wind carried no answer, but she felt it all the same, the soft, silent affirmation that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, as she climbed into bed, Riley realized she no longer felt alone. The house, the barn, the meadow, everything pulsed with life, with memory, with hope. The scars would always be there, but so would the strength to keep moving forward. Storm's presence had changed her. He had given her a reason to get up each day, to try, to care. In saving him, she had begun to save herself. In her brother's journal she wrote, "Some storms don't pass all at once, some leave you changed. But sometimes, in the quiet that follows, you find a way home." Riley closed her eyes, the night deep and peaceful around her, and let herself drift into sleep, no longer haunted by the past, but gently held by all she had found and chosen to keep. There was a peace to the foothills that summer, the sort that only comes after surviving the storm and finding yourself, somehow, still standing. For Riley, life had become a series of small, quiet victories. Each day was no longer something to survive, but something to live, to shape with her own hands. Storm was thriving, his coat gleaming in the sun, his scars faded into the proud marks of a survivor, and Riley, once defined by what she had lost, was beginning to discover all she could still give. One morning, Riley woke before the dawn, not to a nightmare or the press of old grief, but to the gentle stirrings of hope. She found Storm in the pasture, dew shimmering on the grass around him, his silver mane catching the first light like a crown. He nickered softly when he saw her, walking to the fence without hesitation. The trust between them was no longer fragile, but deep and unspoken. She leaned against the fence, scratching his cheek as she watched the sun rise. "You know, I think you saved me more than I ever saved you," she said, smiling as Storm nudged her shoulder in agreement. "Funny how life works, huh?" Riley had begun to venture further into the world. She went to town for supplies, waving at neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. Cass visited often, sometimes bringing other friends. Gentle, curious, never prying. They'd sit on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing, their laughter drifting out over the fields. Sometimes Riley would pause, feeling her brother's presence in the music, in the light, in the way the world had changed but still went on. She'd found herself telling Storm all about him, his stubborn courage, his wild joy, the way he'd always believed in her, even when she couldn't. Those memories, once too painful to touch, had softened, becoming blessings rather than burdens. One late afternoon, as golden light washed over the fields, a family stopped at Riley's gate. Their daughter, maybe 10 years old, stood with wide eyes, staring in awe at Storm grazing beyond the fence. Riley remembered her own childhood, the awe she'd felt at the sight of wild horses running free. The girl's mother called out, "Excuse me, we heard about your Mustang. Is it okay if my daughter says hello?" Riley nodded, feeling a new steadiness in her voice. "Of course. He's friendly, but still a little shy." The girl crept forward, palm open, as Riley taught her how to hold out her hand, to wait for Storm to sniff and decide for himself. Storm, gentle now, stepped closer, breathing in the scent of the girl's hand before nudging her with his soft muzzle. The girl giggled, her eyes shining with wonder. Her mother watched, smiling, and Riley caught a look in her eyes. Relief, gratitude, perhaps the knowledge that sometimes what you most need is found in the most unexpected places. When the family left, Riley stood by the fence, watching the sky blush pink and orange. She realized she felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be, scars and all. That night, Riley sat at her kitchen table, her brother's journal open in front of her. She wrote, "We think we're rescuing someone, but sometimes they're the ones rescuing us. Storm found me in the wreckage of my life, and together we built something new. The past will always be a part of me, but it doesn't have to define me. Healing isn't about erasing pain. It's about letting the light back in." Riley closed the journal and looked out at the barn, where Storm rested beneath the soft glow of a lamp. The air was filled with the sounds of summer, crickets, distant frogs, the whisper of wind in the trees. She realized that her life was not what she'd imagined, or even what she'd chosen, but what she'd made from what was left, and that, she decided, was enough. As the days passed, Riley found herself helping more people. When a neighbor's dog was injured, she didn't hesitate to grab her medical kit and hurry over. She gave advice to others in the community about caring for animals, growing herbs, even patching up a scraped knee or two. With each act, she felt her own strength grow, the thread of purpose weaving her life back together. Cass encouraged her to come by the hospital, even if just to say hello. One afternoon, Riley finally agreed. She drove into town, nerves fluttering, unsure what she would say. But when she walked through the sliding doors, she was greeted not with pity or awkwardness, but with open arms, laughter, and genuine joy. Her old team asked about Storm, about the garden, about her art. They didn't ask about the night she lost her brother. They just welcomed her back, however much she was ready to give. Riley found herself volunteering for a few shifts, not in the trauma unit, not yet, but helping in the clinic, teaching new nurses, sharing what she'd learned about healing, about patience, about the long road back from sorrow. She saw Storm's lesson everywhere: the courage to stand after being knocked down, the humility to accept help, the stubborn grace of survival. She told her story to those who needed hope, the burned-out nurse, the frightened child, the grieving widow, and watched as understanding bloomed in their eyes. Some nights, Riley would walk out to the barn, sitting quietly with Storm beneath a sky spangled with stars. She'd lay her hand on his strong shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and speak aloud to her brother, to the universe, to herself. "We're still here. We made it through. And maybe, just maybe, we're exactly who we're supposed to be, because of what we survived." One evening, as the sun set and the crickets began their song, Riley received a message from a listener of her story, a stranger who had stumbled across her online post about Storm and reached out. "Your story gave me hope. I lost someone too, and for a long time, I thought I'd never feel alive again. Thank you for showing me that second chances exist." Riley smiled, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition and joy. She replied, "Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, even from those who can't speak. I'm rooting for you. Don't give up." As summer deepened, the foothills glowed with life, and Riley's world opened wider with each passing day. She learned that redemption wasn't a single moment, but the quiet accumulation of small mercies, accepting help, giving it in return, loving what was in front of her, scars and all. One night, as Storm dozed and the moonlight flooded the barn, Riley sat by his side and whispered, "We're rescuers, you and I. And sometimes, the ones we rescue end up rescuing us right back." Then, to anyone listening, to those who might be lost or hurting, searching for a sign, Riley offered her story, her voice, and her faith in the stubborn miracle of second chances. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Because you never know. Sometimes, the rescue you offer comes back to save you, too. With Storm by her side, and the night alive with hope, Riley Morgan stepped into the dawn of her new life, broken but brave, scarred but stronger, and finally, beautifully, free.